Welcome to another episode of Assess That with Tom and Nat.
And happy Monday, everyone. We hope everyone had a great weekend.
So excited. Now, today, formative assessment is often talked about, but the real difference lies in the subtle moves that separate good practice from great practice. So today we're going to unpack 5 often overlooked nuances of formative assessment, from eliciting the right evidence to actually adapting instruction in real time.
And we're going to share some subject-specific examples that make each nuance practical and accessible. And our hope is that you'll walk away with some fresh insights and ready-to-use strategies to elevate formative assessment in your own classroom. So that's today's plan. Let's get to it. Today, we're talking formative assessment, but not in the generic, summative that doesn't count kind of perspective that most of us have heard 1,000 times.
Right. So if you've been teaching for any length of time, you already know formative assessment matters. We're not here to change your mind on that. What we want to do today is get into the nuances, the subtle moves that separate a teacher who's good at formative assessment from one who's truly great.
Now, we've narrowed it down to 5 big nuances, and with each one, we're going to share some examples from different subjects, different grade levels. We want you to walk away today with some practical strategies that you can put into practice literally tomorrow.
Let's do it. Okay,
all right.
So nuance 1 is, and again, these are nuances, right? These aren't huge things, but eliciting the right evidence, not just any evidence. Right. This one is huge, actually. Like, it's nuanced and it's actually kind of huge. Yeah. So let's talk about it. So formative assessment is about trying to get to the evidence that we actually need. Too often, and I've been there, like, we're not coming from a place of we haven't done this, we have. We often just check for understanding with like a recall style prompt or a simple exit ticket that's just like a regurgitation of what was taught that day, that don't really reveal the kind of information we need to make any meaningful decisions about what happens next.
Right. It reminds me of like what we used to do is like what we did with hockey cards or baseball cards. Need it, got it, need it, got it, need it. It's like with exit tickets, like got it, didn't get it, got it, didn't get it, so right? So we want to get to a more nuanced approach to it, right? So think about math, for example. We could ask the students, what's 36 divided by 4? So you've got a group of elementary students that are working on division. What's 36 divided by 4? That may tell you who's memorized that fact or who's kind of learned how to do the calculation or punch it into the calculator. But what if you ask the students, for example, show me 2 different ways you could solve 36 divided by 4, and then explain which of those ways you prefer. Now you're getting evidence of their thinking and insight as to whether or not they just memorized the math, because there is trickery to multiplying by 9 and dividing by 9. So, or do they actually understand the thinking behind the math, right?
Yes.
So you've just elicited a little bit more reasoning. You've allowed some flexibility, and you've probably created some efficiency in what you're understanding about your learners.
So let's take this from a literacy perspective. Okay. So this is the difference between asking, hey, who was the main character of the story we read today? And everyone gives you the main character.
Chuck.
Check. Like someone, the kid who does the exit ticket where they do fake letters just to be like, it's done, and they didn't even fill it in.
That's right.
Or we could ask, what choice did the character make that changed the outcome of the story, and why do you think they made it? Totally different kinds of evidence. One is going to get you a one-word answer that you can just mark right or wrong and put a point in the grade book, whatever it is you need to do with that. The other gets you evidence of interpretation, of inferencing, and a little peek into how students are actually constructing meaning.
Right. Listeners, and you're probably sensing a pattern right now is that we're taking these exit tickets and questions from give us a right answer or a wrong answer to explain your thinking or give us evidence of thinking. Let's take a subject like, some people say, well, formative assessment doesn't work in physical education. Well, let's talk about PE. What if you asked, rather than saying, did you complete the circuit? That's a yes, no answer. Did you finish the circuit? Yeah, I did. Or no, I didn't. But what about asking something like this? Which exercise in the circuit challenged you the most today? And how did you make an adjustment to complete it so that you would get through it all? So again, now you're getting insight into their strategies. You're getting insight into how they managed fatigue, self-awareness, all of those things. So it's doable in any subject.
Something really important to tap on here that people might be like, but wait, how do I do I grade that? Do I give it on how much they write for me? Like, do I give them points out of 5 if it's 5 sentences? We get stuck in these old habits of how do I grade it? And then it's the tail wagging the dog. A reminder here that the purpose of formative assessment is to learn something. that inspires some kind of an instructional maneuver. So the fact that there is a million different ways that students can answer these questions is actually a good thing.
Yeah.
Because what we're trying to notice and name is patterns, trends, misconceptions.
Yeah.
So there might be a trend in how students are interpreting something that is not what we want them to do.
Right.
And that tells us that, okay, at the start of class tomorrow, I'm going to do a mini lesson on this piece, re-engage everyone with this concept or idea, do some meaning making, then elicit that evidence again and see if that meaning has shifted. That's where this actually becomes helpful. We're trying to actually expose things that we don't already know. So, oh, I taught you the name of the main character. I taught you, we did a circuit today. Like, yeah, I know that.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Did you complete the circuit? Yes. Didn't you see me go around the gym and complete the circuit?
I know, but we do this, I think, because we're just trying to populate the grade book, and that's a whole nother conversation.
Yeah.
But the nuance here is intentionality.
Yeah.
So you don't just need more formative checks for the purpose of formative checks. You need better ones.
Better ones.
Just to say it bluntly.
Yeah.
So a reflection prompt here that we want to leave you with is think of your last exit ticket or check for understanding activity that you did in the middle of a lesson. Was it eliciting surface level responses that were yes, no, right, wrong, easily graded and marked? Or did it elicit deeper evidence of thinking?
Right. And that's how we turn assessment into a conversation as opposed to a checkpoint and all of that. Okay, listeners, nuance number 2 is interpreting student responses with precision. This is such a critical part of formative assessment because as I travel around and you travel around, we hear this a lot. Natalie and I hear this a ton from teachers, which is, oh, Tom, we do formative assessment. And I say, that's good. My response to anybody, I don't want to dismiss that. That's good that you're doing formative assessment. But what's better is using formative assessment. And in order to use it, you first have to interpret it, right? So the second nuance here is interpreting the responses with a little bit more precision. Great teachers look beyond that right and wrong, and they dig into patterns of thinking. So if the first nuance is to elicit evidence of their thinking, now we're trying to interpret the patterns of their thinking that students reveal.
So let's take a science example now. Let's say students write heat rises when explaining convection.
Right.
That's not just incorrect. It tells you they're missing the role of density.
Yeah.
So now you know exactly what misconception to address.
Right. In social studies, a student might say the war was caused by land or land acquisition. That's not just an oversimplification. It shows that they need to practice thinking about multiple perspectives and multiple layered causes, right? That is what we might call formative gold. Like you are learning not just what they know, but what they don't know and how we can interpret all of their thinking.
I feel like this is such an important moment of like the goal of formative assessment is to know what they don't know.
Yeah.
Not to know what they know.
Right. It's not confirmation
the more I
bias.
learn about this, the years that go by, like if I could go back and just sit down Natalie from like her first 5 years of teaching and be like, stop confirming all the things you already taught them to make yourself feel good.
Right.
It's not about you.
Right. Oh, I know.
Seriously.
It's so interesting because in this world of we need to be strength-based. And I don't disagree with that, right? Because feedback is most effective when it addresses partial understanding, which means there is some semblance of understanding. I have recently been telling teachers that you're going to learn more from the incorrect answers. You're going to learn more from what's missing, or you're going to learn more from what's wrong, because the type of error in their thinking is going to reveal their depth or their lack of depth of understanding. And so while we want to be strength-based, we do need to focus on those incorrect answers, not to be deficit-based, because I know that's something that gets thrown out there, and I just cue the eye roll for me, because I think that in those incorrect answers, you really do learn a lot about what they know and what's missing from their thinking.
That's such a good point. I feel like that needs a whole episode about this concept of, is it truly deficit to acknowledge and notice and name misconceptions, or is it kind?
Yeah.
Like clear is kind, Brene Brown always says, right?
Yeah.
Like if I know there's a glaring misconception and I'm choosing to do nothing about it, who's that actually helping?
It doesn't
like, is
help
that truly
anybody.
kind?
Yeah.
So let's take math as an example. So let's say two students might both get the wrong answer to 2/3 divided by 1/2. But if one treats it like subtraction and the other multiplies incorrectly, those are different errors.
Two different errors.
Interpreting them differently means your feedback can target what each student actually needs rather than just saying X.
Right.
You both got it wrong.
And we talked about this before in one of our grading episodes about how a percentage score doesn't necessarily reveal a depth of understanding because two students could get the same wrong answer, but for a different reason and a different type of error. So the nuance here, listeners, is that formative assessment is as much about diagnosis, like using it diagnostically, as it is about data collection. And this is where I think formative assessment went sideways in the 2000s. We had the electronic gradebooks. We started getting into data collection, and database decisions meant spreadsheets, and we lost the idea of diagnosing what is next for the learners. So if we misinterpret what the students show us, we risk giving the wrong feedback, right? So inaccurate formative interpretation runs the risk of misinforming kids about what's next in their learning. So listeners, here's what we want you to reflect on. The next time you look at student work or student demonstration of learning, instead of asking who got it right, who's right, who's wrong, try asking this question. What does this tell me about how the student is thinking? It reminds me of the Dylan William quote, which I use a lot, which is assessment is about gathering evidence so I can draw an inference about the learner. And that idea, what does this evidence tell me about how the student is thinking, as opposed to did they get it right, did they get it wrong?
So good. So the third nuance that we want to get into is around timing feedback for maximum impact.
Yeah.
So feedback has the most power. And this is going to sound so obvious to the point of being trite, but I think we need the reminder.
Yeah.
There's a whole bunch of reasons why this doesn't happen, but feedback has the most power when it arrives while students can still act on it.
Yeah, totally. When I talk about feedback, and I know you do the same, there's a very simple phrase that I think could replace the way we do feedback at times. So a lot of times feedback will come in the form, it almost sounds like after the fact, right? You should have done this. You should have done this. Yeah. If you just replace that phrasing with now let's work on instead of you should have, you're going to have a completely different energy. And now there's a chance to act upon it. So again, let's think about writing. You hand back an essay and the comments like a week later, students are already done with it. Like that essay was handed in a week ago, which for some kids feels like a lifetime ago. And at the same time, you could rework that entire experience by saying, what if you did a mid-essay check-in? Like what if in their first draft stage, instead of that, you ask the question like, how's your lead working to hook the reader? Like, is your opening sentence grabbing the reader's attention, or does your thesis statement lay out exactly how you're going to formulate your argument? So while the students have time to act upon it, and I've often been an advocate, if you're pressed for time, which of course many teachers are, in an ideal world, we give feedback under every circumstance. But if we are pressed for time, I would rather people give tons of feedback in the formative stages when kids can act upon that feedback than when they hand in their final draft, just grade it. Because if you're going to give them feedback on the final draft that they can't act upon, that is in essence useless feedback. So for me, mid-draft, ask them, are they hooking the reader? Have they laid out their argument? What's their transitions look like? Like all of those things can be really helpful as they formulate their essay. That's when feedback is actually going to change their outcome and change the way that they learn.
Yep. And a little nuance there that you may or may not have picked up on when Tom talked about feedback mid-essay, notice he posted as a question, not a direction. He didn't say, I need you to add this into your introduction.
Right.
He said, how's your lead working to hook the reader? And that's just an important nuance that we want to draw your attention to, that feedback that's a set of directions that students follow leads to an increased score, if you will, that's the result of your thinking.
Yeah.
Not theirs.
Yeah.
And so you're going to see those same mistakes over and over because they're just following your directions. They're not learning. And I think that's just really important to say.
Feedback that causes thinking. You and I are big advocates of that for sure.
Not even advocates. It's research-based.
Well, of course.
It's crystal clear. So let's take math for an example. And this is something we see math teachers do all the time. So this should just be really reaffirming. And no matter, you could not be in math and do this too, honestly. So you circulate, let's say students are working on problem solving. They're at vertical, non-permanent surfaces. You see a misconception come up again and again and again. You pause, you pull the group together, you do a quick reteach on the spot, and that prevents, 25, 30 students from going down the wrong road and saves you hours of frustration and needing to write feedback to all these students later.
Yeah, that's what we call being instructionally agile, is making those maneuvers based on the errors that you're seeing. And in something like, again, these are subjects that often say, well, we can't do formative assessment in our subject like PE, or what about band, or what about choir? again, if a group is off pitch and you stop giving immediate and corrective feedback, they're not going to be able to fix that. But if you do stop and you give that corrective feedback to them and help them hear and feel the difference instantly, they're going to course correct. So I think sometimes we feel like these formative checks and the feedback needs to be epic. Delaying their feedback, like you would say with a writing sample, is not helpful in a choir class. The feedback needs to be immediate. Yeah. And that quick correction, it's almost like these smaller, quick maneuvers are going to add up to a very different outcome for students, as opposed to having these epic moments where I got to do my formative check and I got to roll up my sleeves and put on my lamp and start the tea. Like we really have to get back to the minutia and those quick maneuvers. So if we stop, we give immediate feedback, immediate correction, or we stop in math class and we reteach, that's something that will lead to a more positive outcome.
Yeah. So the nuance here is that feedback delayed is often feedback denied.
Yeah.
So timing matters as much as the message itself when it comes to feedback. So a reflection prompt that we want to leave you with is, where in your current routines could you just move the feedback a little bit earlier so that students can immediately apply it, even if it feels a little less formal to you, even if it feels, dare I say, a little less in depth. That timing is so important. Let it be a little messier, a little in the moment, a little less refined, a little less in depth, but just move them forward one step while they can still act on it.
Yeah, that's such a critical part. Nuance 4 is about who's generating the evidence. And too often, formative assessment is 100% teacher-driven. And this reminds me of the quote that has stuck with me for more than 20 years from Rick Stiggins, which is, the person who does the assessing does most of the learning. And so what happens is, when formative assessment is so teacher-centered, 100% teacher-centered, the teachers learn a lot about the students that the actual students don't know about themselves. So when students are able to self-assess or peer assess, with important, credible criteria, the formative capacity of the classroom starts to multiply.
See, this works in every single subject area, especially the ones that are the harder to assess, if you will, like art, for example. Because if students co-create a rubric on composition and then use it to give each other feedback, like, one strength I noticed in your work was this, one area of strengthening could be this. Suddenly every student is now simultaneously receiving feedback, and it's not just from the teacher, which also makes our workload a lot lighter, which is great.
Yeah, we talk always about how we're outnumbered in the classroom. There's more of them than there is of you, and you can't get to everybody. And yes, your feedback is more expert than the students, and it should be. But many of our students have much to tell one another about how to improve the quality of their work. Let's take a middle school English language arts classroom, for example, asking students to highlight their strongest piece of evidence in a paragraph and explain why it's strong. That self-assessment builds metacognition. Here's my strongest point. Here's why it's my strongest point. And giving them a chance to internalize as to what really counts as quality evidence in their writing.
Absolutely. Let's talk about PE too.
Yeah.
This is one that, again, there is so much that happens when it comes to natural formative feedback. Often it's like, well, we can't have the kids give feedback to each other. It's not fair. Some are so talented in PE and some aren't. Every single PE curriculum across North America has movement skills, tactical strategies. They call it a lot of different things, but it's kind of like the what of PE. Like, these are the things that we're going to teach. Now, I have had this debate with many, many PE teachers, so I'm looking in the camera when I say this. If you don't make those criteria clear from the get-go, there is no chance your kids are going to achieve it. So if you're denying those criteria because you're trying to protect the kids that you think can't do it, you're actually putting the barrier in front of them so that they can't do it. So first of all, we have to unpack what these movement skills are, some criteria, some basic criteria. This does not have to be anything crazy. And often this is just done through checklists, pure observation. Did I see this? Did I see this? Did I see this? You can do this through observation and checklists. And that's a great way to gather evidence in PE outside of the obvious things like, are you here on time? Are you changed? Are you participating? Those are observations for sure, but just naming those criteria of movement skills makes such a big difference in the confidence we see in PE classes. Thank you for listening to my TED Talk.
Yeah. And listeners, the reason we keep bringing up PE, art, choir, band is because we want we want to reemphasize the point that formative assessment is more a verb than a noun, that it is about the action we take. It is about the evidence we elicit. When people say we can't do formative assessment in certain contexts, it usually is because they're thinking of a summative that doesn't count and it's a stapled packet of paper. And if you think of it as an action or a lens through which we teach, every subject has formative assessment at its fingertips. So the nuance here, listeners, is ultimately about capacity building. And this is something that my colleagues and I, Cassandra and Nicole, write about, Natalie and I talk about a lot, which is the end goal of our assessment expertise is not to become experts. The goal of our expertise is so we can turn around and teach the students how to do this on their own behalves, right? So the nuance here is to help build capacity. Students become assessors of their own learning, and they're not just passive recipients to the teacher's judgment. They are really active in that formative realm. So something to reflect upon, listeners, is here's a question. What's one routine in your repertoire that you could shift so students are generating and interpreting evidence that you're not the only one doing that, but you involve the students in being able to also think and interpret for themselves?
All right. So the last nuance is perhaps the hardest of all, but it really is the heart of what formative assessment is. But it's actually doing something with the evidence that you collect.
Yeah, I mentioned that earlier, which is it's easy to gather the data, to gather the information. We do formative assessment, Tom, but it's the using of the formative assessment. And even giving feedback is easy. I mean, that's the power of assessment, but the feedback, the real power of formative assessment lies in the adaptation, right? If the evidence says the students aren't ready for something, then we pivot, we make a maneuver.
For example, in elementary science, if students confuse mass and weight, you don't plow forward and be like, oh, we'll catch that on the quiz. You stop, you do hands-on comparisons, you resolve the misconception.
Right. Or let's take high school history. Right. If a quick writing sample shows that students are having trouble recalling the events or key people, then we stop. If they can recall the events, but they can't connect the dots, then we make a different adjustment, right? We don't just grade them down because they didn't do something. You bring in maybe a cause and effect graphic organizer. You have to make an instructional maneuver. Their misunderstandings or their incorrections are telling you something about where they are. So bring in a graphic organizer or give them a sentence stem or something to scaffold that analysis. Remember, we are in the formative stages here. This is about learning. This isn't about downgrading them because they didn't do something in this moment.
I think there's a really important thing I want to include here, Tom, because in multiple environments that I've led this work in, this can almost be misconstrued by people as I can't move on until everybody's perfect.
Oh, yeah.
And what ends up happening is you have people that are like 4 months into the school year and they're still on like the first concept and they're beating that concept to death because they're like, I must formatively assess to perfection. Remember that if we can think with a standards-based or an outcomes-based mindset, we recognize that that's one opportunity and that sometimes you need to step back from something and let things percolate and then come back to it another time. Like our brains are wired to learn that way. So just a reminder here that we're not suggesting that you get evidence there's a misconception and you hammer it until you perfect it so you can move on. You do something instructionally. That's going to move the students one step forward. They might not be all the way there yet. And then this is why it's so important to think on learning progressions towards learning goals that we want to achieve, because you're going to continue circling back to that. And that repeated exposure over time is not averaged. It's reflected in terms of where we've ended up. And when that's the case, it can kind of take some of the pressure off that I have to formatively assess until perfect so we can move on.
For sure.
Just wanted to say that.
Yeah, no, good point. So, the nuance here is responsiveness, right? Formative assessment isn't a clipboard exercise. It isn't a checklist. It isn't a, yes, we did formative assessment. It is ultimately a steering wheel. It helps us figure out what direction we need to go in. So something we want to have you reflect on, listeners, as you think about the nuances of formative assessment. Here's a question again that we would ask you. When was the last time you truly changed tomorrow's plan based on what today's evidence showed you? That is the power, the nuances of formative assessment. It really is that, as Paul Black and Dylan William talked about way back in 1998, it's the day-to-day, minute-by-minute, ongoing formative moments that really get us to that place. So for us listeners, those would be 5 nuances that will really help take your formative assessment to another level, eliciting the right evidence, interpreting it with precision, the timing of feedback for maximum impact, balancing who generates the evidence, and then ultimately adapting instruction in real time as a result of what the students have shown you.
Now, notice how none of these are about adding more formative checks.
No.
They're about making the formative moves you already use more intentional and impactful.
Exactly. Good formative assessment helps us feel informed. We will never not know what our students need when we do effective formative assessment practices, because great formative assessment helps us take action that actually changes learning outcomes.
Now, we'd love to hear how you're applying some of these nuances in your classroom. Please reach out, share your stories with us, and who knows, we might even feature some of these examples in a future episode. Okay, that's it for this week. We'll be back in 2 weeks with another episode of Assess That.
And don't forget to follow Assess That on Twitter or Instagram. We've got links in the show notes for that.
And if you have any specific topics that you'd like us to talk about, you can DM us on either one of those platforms.
And a reminder to check the show notes for the links for the upcoming professional learning events that we talked about in the opening.
As always, please subscribe, rate, and review the podcast, as it really helps to grow this podcast reach.
And finally, if you like what you're hearing, keep spreading the word about the podcast to your friends, your colleagues, or on social media. We'd really appreciate that.
And remember, assessment isn't just a tool, it's a conversation.
And we're here to make it a better one.
Have a great couple weeks, everyone.